Nature of Society, Part 3, Session 5R. The primary form of trade is barter, the exchange of goods for goods. It is, however, necessary to adopt measures and standards so that the value of different articles can be apprehended. The difficulties with barter soon lead to the adoption of common agreement of some commodity as a medium of exchange, which allow the purchaser to freely purchase a range of goods and services rather than having to exchange a number of goods to finally arrive at the good that he desires. As civilization advances, as society becomes more settled and orderly, and exchanges more numerous and regular, precious metals are gradually superseded as mediums of exchange by credit in various forms. With this system, one purchase is made to balance another purchase, and one debt to cancel another debt. Individuals issue bills of exchange, letters of credit, notes and drafts. Banks transfer credit between individuals. Clearinghouses transfer credit between banks, so that many transactions are undertaken without the use of actual money, all because of trust. Finally, denominations of convenience are printed on paper and used as credit, and these allow transference from hand to hand without endorsement, being cheaper and more convenient than coin metals. The part that money plays in everyday life is so necessary, its use is so common in thought and speech, an actual transaction, that certain misunderstandings with regard to it are likely to arise. This confusion will be looked at this evening. Next term, we shall be dealing with the subjects of money and banking in their entirety. The growth of commerce has made it possible to raise large revenues by indirect taxation, and governments have soon discovered how much easier it is to raise taxes by indirect means than by direct. Import taxes were first levied to obtain revenue, and not only were it found to be convenient, but this also received warm support from the local market. Over the years, this national prejudice and inclination has taken root and has become the general policy of all nations. Adam Smith, the father of Western economics, regarded nations engaged in commerce as merchants competing with each other for the money of the world, aimed at enriching a country by bringing in as much gold and precious metal as possible, while restricting as far as it can any outflow of them. Precious metals are prohibited to be carried out of countries in this regard. Additionally, domestic industry is encouraged to the extent of desiring to export, but every obstacle is placed in the way of foreign goods. Not only are heavy import taxes placed on products of foreign industry, which are in competition with local goods, but the exports of such raw materials as foreign industries might require are burdened with export duties or entirely prohibited under heavy penalty of law. When we say that a businessman is thriving profitably because sales exceed purchases, what we are really thinking of sales is not the goods he sends out, but the money that he takes in. In exchange for them, what we are really thinking of as purchases is not goods he takes in, but the money he pays out. His income is exceeding his expenses. When we compare the trade of a merchant with the trade of a nation, it is not the goods that the businessman sells, but the money that he pays out, analogous to the exports of a country. Not the goods that he buys, but the money he takes in, analogous to imports. The fact is that all trade is barter, the exchange of commodities for commodities. Trade using the facility of money does not change this essential fact. It merely facilitates the transaction into an easier process. When commodities are exchanged for money, half the transaction is completed. When an item is sold for money, this money can be used to buy other goods, and it is this flexibility of use that is the power of money. Hence, money is largely a medium. When we call a wealthy man a moneyed man, we often think that he is in possession of much money, whereas the fact probably is that though he may be worth millions, he may probably only have a few $100s in his possession. His valued possessions consist of houses, lands, goods, stock, bonds, or other obligations to pay. Wealthy men usually do not store away money, but quickly put it to work. If he does not buy commodities for his business, he buys lands, houses, stocks, bonds, mortgages, or anything else that can bring a profitable return on investment. Trade between nations is rarely a number of transactions between individuals aggregated into a complete exchange of commodities for commodities. Money plays no part in international trade, and we are yet to use one international currency. The paper currency that all nations use is never exported to settle balances. What each nation imports is paid for in the commodities which it exports, unless received as loans or investments or as interest, rent, or tribute. The exporter and importer are usually different persons, but the bills of exchange drawn by the one against goods exported are brought by the other and used to pay for goods imported. So far as the country is concerned, the transaction is the same as though importers and exporters were the same persons, and that imports exceeding exports in value is no more proof of a losing trade than that in the old times a trading ship brought home a cargo worth more than the she carried out was proof of an unprofitable voyage. Protectionism gets its strongest support from the belief that products coming from countries whose labor prices are lower to countries whose labor prices are higher are placing the latter at a greater disadvantage if this free competition is permitted. This belief has forced workers to insist that protection is necessary to their interests and the country's interests at large. This belief in the lower labor prices in foreign countries has enabled employers to persuade themselves that reducing or resisting the increase of wages are serving the general interest. This strengthens the opposition to the effects of workers to improve their condition. Those who vociferously assert that we need protection on our goods due to our higher standards of wages do not really need this themselves. If this be so, then protection is mostly needed against countries of the lowest wages and least needed against countries of high wages. If this be needed, then high-wage countries require protection and low-wage countries would desire free trade. What we find, though, is that in low-wage countries, protectionist sentiments are high against free competition coming from high-wage countries. Note, for example, of China and Japan, low-wage countries demanding protection from high-wage US and European goods. The first argument that high wages require protection is premised on A. Low wages meaning low cost of production, and B. Production is determined solely by cost. Let us now examine these two propositions. If a country of low wages can undersell a country of high wages, how was it that in the American pioneer days, the low-wage countries could undersell the high-wage countries? This is because the low-wage countries could not afford to pay the high-wage countries. Hence, the high-wage countries could not afford to pay the low-wage countries. that the American farm worker received double the wages that the English agricultural worker received in the early 19th century. America was still able to have a thriving export to the United Kingdom. American grain in that time was able to undersell the English grain in spite of the disparity in wages because of American natural advantages for the production of grain. As a cost of production, American wages is much less percentage than in the English cost of production. In this example, the rate of wage is not the determining element in the cost of production, and a country of low wages does not necessarily produce more cheaply than a country of high wages. It is not a fact that low-priced labor is an advantage in production. If this were so, then the development of industry in the slave states of slavery America would have been more rapid than in the free states here. The truth is that low rates of wages do not mean a low cost of production. The truth is that the countries where wages are highest are the countries with the greatest economy, because workers here have the most intelligence, the most spirit, and the most ability. Here, invention and discovery are most quickly made and most readily utilized. The greatest inventions and discoveries, which have so enormously increased the power of human labor to produce wealth, have all been made in countries where the wages have been highest. That low wages mean inefficient labor, there are many examples of this. Half a dozen carpenters in a low-wage country are usually needed, whereas in a high-wage country may only require 2. Look at the operations of a similar type in a third-world low-wage country and compare same in any high-wage country. The high-wage country employs fewer skilled workers than the low-wage one and operates with greater skill and efficiency. As a consequence of the larger numbers needed operations in the low-wage environment usually cost more. Example, operations in countries like China, Mexico, etc. If equal amounts of labor produce equal results, then cheap labor might mean cheap production. This is not so. The power of human muscle is the same the world over, although good wages will ensure good health and more productivity. Human muscle is not the primary and efficient force in production. The primary force is human intelligence, and human muscle is an aid to this. Human intelligence, aided by muscle, makes connection with and takes hold of natural resources and forces and molds these into producing things that gratify human desires. Intelligence, however, varies with the standard of comfort, and standard of comfort varies with standard of wages. When workers are condemned to a poor, hard, and precarious existence, their qualities sink toward the level of the brute. Wherever easier conditions exist, the qualities raise the man above the brute, and give him the power to master and compel his environment, develop and expand. Efficiency then is greatest where the best living conditions exist, and that is to say, where wages are highest. How then, in the face of these obvious facts, is the view that a low-wage country has an advantage over a high-wage country? The truth is that this notion that low wages give a country an advantage in production is a careless inference from the everyday fact that it is an advantage to an individual producer to obtain labor at low wages. It may be that an individual entrepreneur may gain an advantage if he can force down the wage level of his employees, or can import labor who will work for much less, and by these means he is able to undersell the competition, while others who continue to pay higher wages will eventually be driven out of business. But it in no means follows that a country where wages are low can undersell a country where wages are high. The efficiency of labor, though it may somewhat vary with the particular wages paid, is in a greater degree determined by the general standard of comfort and intelligence and the prevailing habits and methods that come out of them. In the instant case where wages are lower than the average, the efficiency of labor is still largely fixed by the efficiency at the higher rate. Where, however, the general rate of wages is low in a country, there is no advantage over high-wage countries because the general efficiency of labor is predictably low. As we said last term, the general effect of reduction of wages in any country would be to alter the distribution of wealth. Of the amount produced, less would go to the wage worker and more to those who share in the results without contributing to it. The worker, getting less than before, would have to reduce his standard of living. Others who would have increased incomes would consume more costly items. The country as a whole would have no more to sell when wages are higher and would be in no better position to import more. In a little while, the effect of these lower wages would be the inevitable degradation of labor, the reduced power of production, and both exports and imports would fall off. When, however, there is a general increase in wages, the effect would be a distribution of wealth where more aggregate would go to the working class and less on those who live on the labor of others. The result would be cheaper luxuries and less costly ones. Productive power would increase. There would be no less exports and no less ability to pay for imports. Next week, we will continue our discussion on trade. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all, eventually all over the world. To make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for the dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on the monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address nigelgittins@gmail.com. Thank you for your kind gesture.